Welcome to 2016. Team. Welcome to 2016, Jake.
Hey.
Welcome to 2016, Ben.
I'm gonna prefer to still live in 2015, so you guys enjoy.
Tell us about Faraday. Ben has a shirt that says Faraday. Was he a chemist?
No, and I'm gonna butcher this because I'm not as up to date when I bought the T-shirt, but I just know that he was actually not formally trained, and he was so interested personally that he came from some totally opposite field, and he was a lab assistant, and then I forget whose lab assistant he was. That is an important detail too, so anybody who wants to Google it, you should.
Faraday.
Yep. And then he was pretty formative with experiments on, I want to say, it was something with electricity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it no, I don't want to say that publicly.
Like electromagnetic fields, I think.
Yeah.
And I obviously...
This has nothing to do with today's topic, by the way.
No, but it is very... It's, you know what, it's general knowledge that it's very interesting. And obviously, I can appreciate that because he kind of was outside the accepted model and came in and did some groundbreaking stuff. Yeah.
There was a Faraday building we had when I was an undergrad. I failed a math class in there twice. So shout out to Faraday West.
The end.
But I stayed in there. I stayed in my program. So, welcome to 2016. 2016, I keep saying that because I think 2015 was a huge year for programming. A lot of people were self-empowered with learning how to program or getting great coaches who program for them. And I think a lot of people have learned a lot of programming in the micro sense. They know how to do a block, build a few block-to-blocks here and there. And I think a lot of people have really... I'm actually impressed at the amount of education that's been kind of prevalent out there publicly. But today, it's more so geared towards now that you can program, or now that your coach is programmed for you, or now that you have the power of good programming, how to properly allocate that in the macro sense as an athlete, not just saying, I'm going to write this block in what now. So I guess you can start it off with the conversation we had the other day.
Yeah. Or
the other year, really.
True. Yeah. No, it was this year. It was just yesterday.
No, dude. Okay, I'll tell it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do the one from yesterday. So when I first started getting, when I kind of made my switch, I started programming, and I was learning kind of everything I could take in from Mike and Mike's papers. I was reading Mike's dissertation at the time, actually. Dr. Zordo's his dissertation at the time, trying to just learn more. And I remember looking at it and thinking, like, okay, this all makes sense, and I've been an athlete my entire life, but like this says nothing about like off season or like and at the time I didn't understand periodization fully and planning and peaking properly, but I saw how you can get results from intensity blocks or volume blocks, and I understood how that worked. But I think the one thing I was missing was the intuition of, if I'm an athlete, how do I plan this? Like, what do I do with this programming information now that I have? And there wasn't a good answer a year and a half, 2 years ago whenever we had this conversation, but we recently, yesterday, we kind of got back on the topic.
Yeah, and I guess the shortest version of it is that Ryan and I were training, and we started just talking general programming stuff, and he said back in the beginning, one of the major things for him when we would originally discuss programming was, what do you do after a block, after multiple blocks? Like, do you just keep going through and repeating the same thing? And I think number one, it's important to note that is actually not periodization, because you're just continually doing the same thing. It's pretty much static. Yeah. And just to throw out a couple terms for either people who may not know that they can look into if they're ever come across reading books on programming or periodization, or I guess for people who are aware of them, is what you often hear are microcycle, mesocycle, macrocycle, and they're not completely static. Typically, like a microcycle is 1 week. A mesocycle is usually a block, quote unquote, which is can range really anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, even up to 12. But traditionally, in at least literature, they're 4. And then you have the macro cycle, which is pretty much the yearly plan, but it could encompass multiple years. So that is it's a great question. And Ryan's question was, what do you do? So even after, let's say, a mesocycle, like a block, I think that's a big question for some people, is like, let's say I found this program, which technically something like Smolov or Smolov Jr. is pretty much a block, or the actual Smolov program it's 2 blocks, and you have the volume block and you have the intensity block, and or 2 mesocycles if you want to look at it that way too. It's, saying the same thing. But anyway, what do you do after that? And it's a very important question to touch on, because I think traditionally, at least from where I came from in bodybuilding, most people say or think, well, I ran this, I was successful with it, I'll run it again.
Yeah.
And either just change my numbers and run it again, which is same sets and rep schemes, just different intensity or different load. Or I'll just keep running it till it doesn't work or anything like that. And to approach a properly periodized program like that can be a problem. So the important follow-up that I had when Ryan and I continued the conversation the other day at the gym was, I think the most important thing to touch on here is bridging the gap between not necessarily where the currently published research fails or where the literature fails, but where it's just on a lag, because you have to understand that first you need to realize the problem before you can develop an intervention and then publish a paper on it, and there is a lag time. So that gap needs to be bridged, because you can't keep perpetually doing the same thing, and this is where anecdote is very important and comes into play, and or at least experience. And collectively, I think with all of us, what we've found is, and one of the problems with long-term programming are injuries. And I know anybody, obviously, who's lifted weights has gone through some type of issue with that. So it goes beyond the question of how can I get somebody, let's just say, how can I optimize or make more efficient strength gains? Now, beyond that, obviously, once you've satisfied that criteria, you can't just assume that that's a static equation now and you'll never get injured. Now you need to say, how can I maximize strength gains? And now you're adding another level of criteria onto it, which is how can I maximize them and minimize the risk of injury or injuries? Right. And that's where this thing of what do I do beyond a block, what do I do beyond a macro cycle? So I'll stop talking because I want other people to be part of this, and we'll explore that.
Keep talking, please.
I think one of the important things about the DUP is that I think Dr. Zordos does a really good job whenever he presents on this, is that kind of when you look at DUP on a microcycle or mesocycle level, you see these undulations, and it kind of just looks like they're waving back and forth, back and forth. But as you kind of zoom out and look at things from the bigger picture or the macrocycle picture, you do see that it actually is still following a kind of traditional periodization model. So if you're not familiar with what that means as far as the different models of periodization, basically how you'll start over a long term is kind of with a quote-unquote accumulation block. So basically you'll have high volume, low intensity, and you'll see this in, I think it's in the CSCS book, they go over all this. Mm-hmm. Basically you'll have high volume, low intensity, and as time goes on, even throughout the course of the year essentially, or towards as you get closer to your competition, generally for us, since intensity is sport specific, or higher intensity is sport specific, intensity is going to go up and volume is going to go down. Now those undulations are still going to be happening on the small level, but on a broad scheme, if you were to draw like a line of best fit, it's still going to be
trend line.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's still going to have that same
linear aspect.
Yeah.
So putting that in like a real life perspective, I think the thing that kind of made me, I guess, kind of have it make sense, because initially, when I heard high volume, low intensity, and then like those two kind of in the macro sense over the year of your training, switching higher intensity, lower volume, it just didn't make sense to me. And I think the way that it only made sense was to use it to a sport that you have played or one of us have played outside of powerlifting, because I think powerlifting, we see it as I want to do a meet soon, but you never see a tennis player say, hey, I'm off season and I want to do a meet in a month. That you wouldn't be able to follow those principles. So think about one thing that kind of helped me was baseball. I never played baseball, but every spring I have to deal with a ton of traffic from the New York Yankees here, so where they play spring ball in Tampa. And spring ball to me is insane because it's actual baseball games that no one is taking seriously. And you can consider a spring ball game, they play twice a day, 3 times a day sometimes, and they just play a lot of baseball, but it's not that serious. So I think of that, and it's not exact, but I think of that as a high volume, low intensity type of training. These baseball players know, like, the World Series is in October, and right now it's March. So I'm not going to come out here and try to hit fucking 500 homers. Like, I'm just going to kind of take it easy, get back in the swing of things. And I think with powerlifting, people want to be elite athletes and they want to get to the next level, but it gets back to, I guess, coaching and controlling yourself and not being a victim to your own devices of rushing to a meet. And you were saying something earlier about this industry is weird in the aspect that you tell your coach what to do and the coach doesn't plan for you. I don't want to ruin what you said earlier, but it was something along those lines.
I think it has a lot to do with, like, burden of responsibility.
Yeah.
So, like, and I think some clients are better at handling this than others, and they tend to be the ones that have previously been athletes in the conventional sense.
Yeah.
But so a client comes to a consultant and they say, I have a meet at X date. I want to perform like this or whatever. And so now the burden of responsibility is on basically the consultant to get this person to perform their best. And it's kind of like they're kind of choosing what they want to do, and like the consultant has to kind of,
here's this mess, organize it for me.
Yeah, kind of. And that's so different from like I played football. So like,
right.
I mean, in football, if you don't do what the coach tells you to do, like, you're just off the team. Like,
right. Yeah.
Okay, you're not playing.
But the coach knew that, like, you need to do. Why did you need to do 2-a-days in the beginning? From a programming perspective, any type of programming perspective.
Well, that's basically getting a lot of volume.
A lot of volume, but you're not like, what was one term they use? No pads, right? So the intensity was low. You weren't like out here like tackling each other. Yeah. You were just kind of playing a light portion of the game, and that would be equivalent to, like, let's say, I don't know, something easy like a, I don't know, like a 9-7-5 blocker or like a volume blocker or something simple like that. And I think the kind of important part to that is that I think we really need to start respecting that, like, this is an individual sport, but in those team sports, when the coaches have an overhauling plan, like, they did it for a reason, you know, and the reason wasn't like, you're not going to be game day ready for day one. So I think the point that I'm trying to make, at least, is that it's the beginning of the year. Well, I kept talking about 2016, and hopefully this podcast can help you kind of say, when do I want to do my meet and how should I plan it out? So from a practical approach, and I hate to put you guys on the spot, but let's say we had two athletes. Let's say we had, let's take LS McLean, right? He's one of our de novo athletes. LS gets invited to a meet probably every 3 months, every 2 months, because that's kind of his job at this point. Just kind of, he's a high level competitor.
Yeah, he's high profile.
Versus someone who may be doing their first meet this year. So those two athletes, easy for you since you actually do LS stuff, but peaking, how would you take that approach? I guess you can do both examples. So beginner, expert.
I mean, if I was going to work with a beginner and they just wanted to do like one meet,
just how would you approach it as a coach to say when should we do it, when would be a good time? I know it's very individual based, so lots of assumptions here.
Yeah, well, honestly, I would like to work through like the logical progression of like accumulation block and then work through like something kind of mid-range in between that, and then work them up to doing a block of very specific things like for their competition.
How long do you think that would be generally? Up until the
it would be great if we could run like full like 6-8 week blocks each time.
Right.
I guess otherwise, if they're competing more often, like LS would be doing, there would be a lot of like transition blocks and things like that. So that makes it a little bit harder, I feel like. I don't know. I guess this is more personal, but for me, I feel like I need to kind of pick up steam like as the block goes on and kind of, I guess, test at the end. So I can kind of get to that point where I feel like I'm starting to get like overreached, and then I can actually taper back. So it feels like, I guess, the volume is actually accumulating and manifesting into something.
Jorge is going to be testing here this weekend in chat.
Yeah, he is.
Ben, beginner, expert, advanced, I should say.
Yeah, I think a big part is people understanding that.
Knowing when you're a beginner and knowing when you're advanced.
That's a big part. And also understanding that there really isn't a template, and people often ask that or desire that. And even, don't get me wrong, templates can work. I mean, obviously Smolov is a template out there that's universally adaptable. But I think to understand appropriateness is based on individualization. And a template is never going to give you that. So one of the most important things, I think, when someone's just starting out, either with me, regardless of where they are, but I think it's most applicable to the beginner scenario, is that it's important for them to understand that the effect, at least in the beginning, builds. It's not, I have 4 weeks, show me what you got in 4 weeks. Right. Just like you were talking about the very distinct seasonal modality of most athletics, and then off-seasonal modality. It's like you don't just make the team and then start having games the next week
4 week intensity
and say,
block.
Here coach, give me a week to prepare and make sure I'm ready. Which is that's probably the rationale behind doubles, is most of those kids just go and screw around and don't do anything. They got to get them prepared in a short time period. But anyway, optimally, that's not something that you want to, that's not the condition you want to be presented.
Why not?
Well, because number one, it encourages you to have to push the pedal down too hard, and there's no real reason for that.
Again, it's because basically the burden is on you. They are in that you're going to be able to get them these great lifts in no matter what time they signed up in. And
work your magic.
Yeah. Basically, be a magician.
Yeah.
When that's not really
there's no magic.
Yeah. Well, the problem is
there's no magic.
You realize that it's almost like having the needle that's kind of teetering back and forth at all times, and when you desire more in a short time frame, you're pushing the needle closer to injury. And when you're giving a larger time frame, you're actually putting the needle in a much more kind of neutralized position, which is between both. Because realize anytime you're pushing, to get better adaptation, you're always going to now increase risk of injury. It's the nature of anything. It's not like look at guys like Kobe, great athletes. Like, let's go outside of powerlifting.
Even
when you
musicians
push yourself constantly.
Like drummers have injuries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It happens when you push yourself constantly. So you have to go in to the situation logically understanding realistic expectations. But I don't want to get too far off because I do want to answer your questions. So the first thing I would do is let them know, like, understand that a month of training with me is not going to be dramatic. No. And even if you give me 8 weeks up to a block, I can most likely get you stronger, but don't just come in and let me know I have 8 weeks to help you and then drop it like a bad habit.
Yeah, exactly.
Because now what you're doing is you're perpetually looking for a solution and you're not ever giving one, like, anything to actually fully manifest itself, which is a problem. Because again, you have to consider anything that you do in a life is a chronic. The effect is due to chronic exposure to it. It's not just acute. Unless
to get that chronic exposure to it, you need to be healthy to not totally back off 100% and have to recover.
Exactly. And you know what? If you do and you get injured, then you might get totally, hate it because it's like, oh, well, this screwed me up. I hate the sport. It just makes you get injured. Anyway, so for that person, I would encourage them to, if they come to me with a short time frame, since it's not an emergency, pick a later date, give me some time to get through a couple blocks to appropriately peak them through. And if I were to move forward with that person, I would encourage them to pick really maximally around 3 to 4 meets a year.
Yeah.
Because you have to understand, running through a full macro cycle is important because you need to get restorative blocks in there. And if you're constantly, as I call it, riding the intensity train, you're doing no better than the popular program in the Flex or, like Weider publications, which is, think of like anything that you've seen, the romanticized vision of training is like, I killed it. What does that mean? You trained yourself to feeling burnt out.
And you got away with it.
Yeah, but you did it, and usually what suffered was volume. The most important variable long term for you. So realize that going forward, if you have this plan, and I was guilty of it too, and actually early on, I heard Matt Gary say, like, maximally you want to pick around 3. Even the first guy that I worked with back home said the same thing. And anyway, you have to understand that the more desire and more meets that you want to do, like, I will allow somebody to do it. I'm not going to tell them they can't, but realize that it's going to fuck up your macro cycle every time, because now you're riding multiple intensity blocks. Every time you do that, it impacts the long-term plan. You can't just keep peaking.
That sounds like, to me, like, especially for an athlete, it's like you have to get good at picking your battles.
Absolutely. And also enjoy the training.
Yeah.
Like, don't just focus on the meet. I understand there's a lot of people there. It's your opportunity to perform in front of a crowd. That's fine. But if you're not enjoying the training, you might actually want to think about why you're even doing this. And I actually feel like I can probably answer the long-term one with the advanced, probably a little bit quicker. Because usually they come to you with an understanding that, they can't do every meet in the world. And that's something that actually LS and I have had that conversation, is like, we kind of need to pick and choose our battles now.
Right.
Because you're going to be invited to a lot of stuff. And that's where kind of restoration comes in. So yes, we have actually peaked more times than I would have liked.
Right.
But again, using the visualization of it, which is pulling the needle back, we've also done a lot more restoration than a normal macro cycle would entail. So he's not just doing these super high volume, super high intensity, super high frequency blocks. He has done them to peak for major meets, but he's not just statically staying there.
Right. Yeah.
Because the worst thing you want to do with an elite athlete is hurt them. Because then they're what? And they are a has-been elite athlete who's now hurt. and talking about their previous victories. So.
And then the mental confidence is not there, and a whole other slew of problems with injuries, as we've talked about in injuries.
And all you're thinking about is not, I need to focus on my cues and motor patterns of this movement, but this is going to hurt.
Yep.
That's a problem.
Do you think that just kind of like, so you'll have a person and they kind of come to you, and it could be like any time of the year, and they may have whatever meet picked out. Like, I'm not sure how like scheduling of meets works and things like that, but is there like a standardization as far as like time periods to like when things consistently are? I mean, obviously nationals, but
the only thing I really know is, I do think most meets are, and somebody higher up or that was more affiliated with USAPL scheduling and stuff would be able to answer this better. But I do know that they usually put out major meets plans a year ahead. So you can go onto the USAPL website and see where the major meets, like when they'll be, usually where they'll be. Just like you said, nationals and other kind of big meets that have been happening for the past couple of years.
You know the tough part about powerlifting compared to at least bodybuilding? It's like bodybuilding is pretty straightforward. It's like, okay, best shows, the deeper in the fall, the better the show.
Yeah,
and it's pretty easy. Like, but with powerlifting, it's like well, we got the Arnold in March, and nationals, and then Worlds is in June, and it's like it's kind of like the sporadic, like for the elite powerlifter, at least in the USAPL, there's no real like break. And I think that's tough because a lot of USAPL lifters love the USAPL and they love lifting in it. Yep. And like, I even know I just got like invited to an invite, and like the person who asked me, I personally want to like just see the person and see the place. So like, it's hard since it's got that family tie to it. But I think again, it kind of goes back to like the athlete knowing like, are you an athlete or are you Hollywood?
Yep.
And I think that's what you need.
Well, I think what we kind of were saying was that understanding how your short-term decision impacts your long-term.
Yeah. And I think that ties back to an overall respect for like yourself as an athlete and for the sport. Like, and I know it sounds redundant, but I would like, again, since this is our first podcast of the year, like really think about that. I know we have a large powerlifting base who listens to this. Like, one thing that I've personally have had as an athlete that has made me somewhat successful is listening to myself. The reason that I am even in any type of elite meets in powerlifting is because I took the same confidence in myself that I said, you know what, I'm not going to bodybuild because I know if I get out there, I would be forcing it and I'd be lying to myself. So if you feel like you're forcing something because I just want to do it, or I just want to see, if you just want to see what you want to lift, I think that's no problem knowing, like, and I tell this to my athletes too, I say, well, if you want to do a test meet, know this, you're just going to go, we're sticking with the year-end plan or the mid-year plan or whatever the proper peaking date is. Consider this meet a test day. Like, This meet is not going to be your highest level of attempts. Like, the goal is 9 for 9. Like, we're just going to have a mediocre meet. So don't expect to go in there and, like, have a phenomenal day. So that's one thing to consider. Also, I can't say it enough. Like, pick the day you want to shine. Like, everyone gets their day. Like, everyone has their shine day. Everyone has their limelight. Everyone will have their win. Like, you may only have one your whole life. Like, that's maybe all you can get. But, like, you got to plan that motherfucker out. Like, you've really got to plan.
Yeah. I think a big thing that I thought about when you said that is, and this is just a quick thought, is I have had people say, I want to do this meet. It's in these certain conditions. I'll be in this area, and an alternative, like I'll say, is just, well, we're just not going to peak you for it. You can go do the meet, but it's basically you're doing a meet off of a volume block. So just like you said, don't expect, So if you're heart set on it, that's fine, but just understand that you're not going to be hitting PR.
It's not going to be your finest hour.
Yeah.
Do you think that, like, basically the fact that most people are not athletes for their main job is kind of an issue with that, because as you said, like a lot of times people just choose things based on convenience. Like it may not be convenient to us, but to them, like they're not an athlete. But
you got to pick.
Yeah.
If it's a hobby, then know it's a hobby.
Right.
Like if you're an elite athlete, then know you're an elite athlete. Like you got to pick. You can't ride both sides. Like
very true. But I think that just can be one of the problems of not knowing the bigger picture, is that it's just, for most people, it's not like the only thing they do, or a really, 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 really big part, I guess, of their daily or weekly life.
Yeah, I think that actually is a very important point, because I think perception can be quite a misleading thing, especially when you see your favorite lifters performing really well, and there's like this aura around it, kind of, where it's just like, I wonder what they do that I'm not doing. And one of the important things, again, to realize is usually when you get up to the higher tier, number one, it's a pretty clear sign when you first start competing if you tend to do well regularly.
Yeah.
And then when you're getting up onto maybe the national level, performing really well, and you get onto the world team, then you have to get progressively more serious. And I think the prioritization of training and stuff takes precedent in your life. And comes close to
it becomes
job.
A full-time job to keep up that volume, that training. Yeah.
And the thing to not, I guess, try to ignore or find some magical way around is that when you get to that level, it's going to constantly over time require more of you, because again, we're talking about adaptation. So if you stop doing anything, like imagine you read books every day for 20 years and then you just stop reading, you can't expect that your efficiency of finishing a book to be maintained.
We were literally just talking about that.
Yeah.
Literally just
after you stop doing it. And so the requirement is only going to increase over time. You're not
Audible.
Yeah, exactly.
Else read it for me.
Passively read a book, receive a book. But yeah, so that's a big thing, is like, at some point when you get to a high level, or you're trying to be at a high level, it is going to require more and more and more of you, not less and less and less.
And I think that's going to point to that bigger picture thinking, and especially on the side of the athlete. I mean, if they're committed to it to that degree, it's kind of like you said, they'll come in with more reasonable expectations, and kind of know on a more specific and practical level what the year is going to look like.
Right. Yeah. So hopefully, I mean, I guess something that people would get from this is, if they are in that novice, intermediate, or beginner stage, is to go in with the understanding, that we've kind of already talked about quite a bit, of at least to try to now have some knowledge of, go in with the understanding of the more experienced athlete.
Yeah. And as you leave from, I guess, a small-time hobby, it's almost inevitable, unless you like the pace that you're at, that it will consume more of you over time. If it's just natural human behavior, something that's enjoyable, you will seek to have more of it. And as you seek to have more of it, you invest more, and it's kind of owns you to some degree at some point. I was looking at I was finally writing my training out, not just day by day. I actually planned it, ironic enough. And I was looking at my numbers and my volume from last year, because obviously the same blocks I ran, I want to make sure I exceed that volume. And I was looking at some of my numbers, and I even went back and looked at some of the videos that I had. And I was just looking and I was like, wow, like I used to get those workouts done so fast, like so easy, but like I was making results there. And like every session feels super frustrating now. And it's because, like you said, it's like the burden of responsibility. Like I know what I have to do now, like the more of it. And I'm still pretty amateur. And you guys know, like I'm still pretty amateur in terms of like some of the guys whose volume out there is just like through the roof and their frequency is 4 times a week and things like that. But I think as you become a better athlete physically, mentally, your game plan's got to be better. You know, it's like you don't see Tom Brady go out there and just do what he did in Pee Wee football. I mean, just
celebrate when they lose.
Yeah,
he's got the best bitch face I've ever seen.
Exactly. It didn't go to plan. He's not. I mean, I'm sure he had a great arm when he was in 3rd grade, but I'm pretty sure he's upgraded. Like, all right, how many big ones can I throw before my fucking arm gives out? Like, I'm pretty sure he has an idea of how many he can do. So, I guess key takeaway for me is a better athlete is a smarter athlete, and work with your coach or work with yourself if you're your own coach or the people. Even like Brian Whitaker, he's a bodybuilder, but Brian has probably the best consultants for him. Like he doesn't have a coach directly, but he has, I think, 4 or 5 guys that he trusts to keep him sane and to make sure his plan's on target. Key takeaway?
I think if this is something you realize you want to make a large investment in of your time, which is training wise, I think you also need to understand and commit to making a large time investment of thought too. And that means even if you have somebody who is programming for you, because due to the nature of the way things operate right now, like this isn't an Olympic sport. You don't have one coach who is like just with you and is paid by the Olympic Committee or whatever to just oversee you. So the better you know you and you can communicate that, the better that someone can actually help you.
We're like better. MMA before UFC at this point.
Yeah.
Like just kind of.
Yeah.
Jake?
Try to focus on, I think, being process-oriented rather than goal-oriented.
Yeah, that's very.
And I think that'll help avoid some of the kind of the short-term thinking of, like, I want to do this meet now, like I got to do this. And kind of as Ben said, if you just enjoy the training, I think you may tend to be a little bit more patient, and then everything will kind of just flow more smoothly.
I like that. This is a physiological portion of the podcast, so they're not as fun, but I think they're even more important. Like, I mean,
for you,
they're more important. So, I mean, thank you for sticking with us. As like, I can't reiterate. Like, you want the perks. You want to do the big Ray Williams turn around, 2 fingers in the air celebration. Like, Ray Williams also has a very smart team. So, I mean, it's all about planning and like peaking for those days. Just because you see the end result doesn't mean that he got there randomly or anybody else. So, I would say for the new year in your training, like plan. And based off our other podcasts, I hate to say it, but plan for injury as well. Like
understand that it is part of the game.
That's just an important part of periodization. Like, a big component of periodization is making progress sustainably.
Yes.
And if you, whatever the best way sustainably means, that's what you do.
And you don't know the limit until
that's sometimes that's part of the process is finding it out through painfully.
Yeah. All right, thank you guys as always. We haven't done a 3 together podcast in a while.
Yes, like a month.
Our next podcast we'll have some special people. Shetz will be in town.
Oh my gosh.
God, he's gonna dump it on us. Katie will be in town, so we'll have maybe 2 or maybe 1. We'll see.
It'll be a podcast party.
I can't wait.
Fiverr.
I just can't wait for Jorge.
Pottery. Fuck it.
Pie's not. All right. Thank you. Talk to you relatively soon.